Have you ever wondered why some mornings feel heavier than others, as if your spirit wakes up carrying battles you have not even fought yet? And why, on those days, the words of Psalm 27 strike your heart with a strength that feels almost supernatural? It is because this psalm was not written merely to be read. It was written to awaken something inside you. It was written to realign your spirit the moment the day begins, to remind you that whatever rises against you cannot rise above the God who goes before you. When David declared, "The Lord is my light and my salvation," he was not expressing poetry. He was declaring survival. He was naming the source of courage that held him together when everything else seemed to fall apart. Starting your day with Psalm 27 is like stepping into a spiritual shield before the world even knows you are awake. It steadies your emotions. It confronts your fear. It calls your spirit into alignment when your mind still feels scattered. Because this psalm is not about pretending life is easy. It is about remembering that you are never facing life alone. And maybe that is the question your heart needs this morning. What would your day look like if you truly believed that the Lord is your light before the darkness even tries to speak? How different would your decisions be if salvation, not fear, guided your steps? How much peace would settle into your chest if you allowed this scripture to be the first voice that shapes your thoughts? The truth is, many people start their day with anxiety, with rushing, with the weight of unfinished tasks or unresolved emotions. But those who anchor themselves in Psalm 27 start their day with a different kind of strength, a quiet, steady assurance that comes from knowing God does not simply watch over you. He walks with you, and this morning may be the very reminder your spirit has been waiting for. Because when you begin your day with this truth, everything else finds its place. Fear loses its grip. Worry loses its voice. Confidence rises not from self but from Him. So as you take in these words, allow them to reach the places that feel fragile. Allow them to settle into the corners of your heart that still feel restless. You might be surprised by how deeply they speak to what you did not say out loud. And before we continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt God strengthening you through this psalm in a moment you did not expect? If so, share your experience in the comments. Your story might be the confirmation someone else needs this morning. And while you are here, remember to like this video and check if you are subscribed, because understanding this message could be exactly what prepares your spirit for the next part of this journey, which is about to unfold with even deeper clarity. When David declared, "The Lord is my light and my salvation," he was not merely describing who God is. He was describing what fear becomes when God steps into the room. Light does not argue with darkness, it replaces it. Salvation does not negotiate with danger, it delivers. And when you start your day anchored in this truth, something inside you begins to shift. The anxieties that once felt overwhelming begin to lose their authority. The worries that used to steal your morning no longer sit on the throne of your emotions. Because Psalm 27 is not just a verse to recite, it is a spiritual repositioning. It reminds you that courage is not something you create. It is something you receive when you remember who walks beside you. So many people begin their mornings trying to control what they cannot predict. They rehearse possible failures. They anticipate disappointments. They carry fears that were never meant to guide their decisions. But this psalm interrupts that cycle. It pulls you out of your own thoughts and places you beneath the covering of God's presence. The Lord is my light is more than comfort. It is clarity. It is the kind of clarity that cuts through confusion and redirects your heart before chaos even has the chance to speak. It is the reminder that God is not watching you from a distance. He is illuminating the very path you are about to walk, revealing what you cannot see and protecting you from what you do not yet know. And then David says, "Whom shall I fear?" not as a question, but as a declaration. Fear loses its shape when placed next to the reality of God's strength. The very threats that once seemed intimidating shrink under the weight of His presence. This is why beginning the day with this revelation matters so deeply, because before you answer messages, face responsibilities, or confront challenges, your spirit needs to remember its source, not your capability, not your planning, not your preparation, but His covering, His guidance, His steady hand that lifts you when your own strength feels unsteady. There is something powerful that happens when this truth settles into your spirit early in the morning. Your mind becomes calmer, your steps become more deliberate, your reactions become less controlled by emotion and more shaped by conviction. You stop moving through the day as if everything depends on you and start walking as someone who is being carried by grace. That is what David understood. That is what Psalm 27 invites you into. Not a denial of challenges, but a redefinition of courage. And as this awareness deepens, your heart begins to embrace a different kind of strength, one that prepares you for the next revelation waiting to unfold just beyond these words, shaping how you face whatever rises ahead. When David spoke of enemies rising against him, he was not only describing physical threats, but the invisible battles that press against the soul, the kind that follow you into the morning before your thoughts are fully awake. Psalm 27 does not ignore these battles, it exposes them and reframes them. Because whether the enemy is external or internal, visible or silent, the truth remains the same. They stumble and fall, not because the fight is small, but because the God who stands with you is greater. And when you begin your day with this awareness, something powerful happens inside you. The pressures that normally sit heavily on your chest begin to lose their influence. The fears that try to speak loudly in the morning begin to fade into a whisper. You are reminded that you are not stepping into the day unprotected, unprepared, or alone. There are moments when the battles you face are not people but thoughts, not voices around you, but the echoes within you. Anxiety, doubt, insecurity, old wounds that resurface without invitation. These are enemies too, and David understood them well. Yet he spoke with a confidence that rises above emotion, a confidence anchored in the character of God rather than the landscape of his circumstances. Though a host encamp against me, my heart will not fear. This is not denial, it is alignment. It is the declaration of a heart that knows who holds the final word over every situation. And this is what makes Psalm 27 so important at the start of the day. Because before the world has the chance to pull you in different directions, this psalm centers you. It calls your spirit to attention and reminds you that battles cannot define you unless you allow them to. Fear cannot claim you unless you grant it permission. The presence of enemies does not signal the absence of God. Often it highlights the depth of His protection. Even when life feels unpredictable, even when pressures rise without warning, Psalm 27 grounds you in a truth that does not change. The Lord is the strength of my life. This is the shield that surrounds you before you take your first step into the day. It does not remove the battle, but it reframes your posture within it. The focus shifts from what threatens you to the one who sustains you. The weight on your shoulders begins to feel lighter, not because the challenges vanish, but because your confidence begins to rest on something stronger than fear. And as this truth settles more deeply into your heart, you begin to notice that courage is not something you wait for. It is something you step into, one breath, one moment, one morning at a time, preparing your spirit for the next layer of this passage that continues shaping your strength from within. There is a moment in Psalm 27 when David shifts from speaking about danger to speaking about dwelling, and that shift is not accidental. After acknowledging the battles around him, he turns his attention toward the only place where fear cannot follow him, the presence of God. When he says that God will hide him in his shelter and set him high upon a rock, he is describing more than protection. He is describing refuge, a spiritual chamber where the noise of the world loses its authority and the heart finds rest again. Beginning your day with this awareness changes the atmosphere around you and within you. It reminds you that the real strength of the morning is not found in your schedule, your energy, or your confidence. It is found in the quiet steadiness that comes from being held by the one who sees every step before you take it. Many people rush into the day, carrying storms that were never meant to be carried alone, thoughts that feel heavier than they should, emotions that swirl without clarity, responsibilities that feel too large for the moment. But this psalm teaches you something different. It teaches you that refuge is not a place you visit once the day becomes overwhelming. It is a place you enter before the day even begins. God becomes the sanctuary your heart retreats to, the safe place where your spirit gathers strength before facing anything outside its walls. And when you understand this, mornings begin to feel different. They feel less like a race and more like a resetting, less like a burden and more like a breathing space where God prepares your heart for what lies ahead. David understood that refuge was not escapism, it was empowerment. Being hidden in God did not remove his challenges, it repositioned him above them. It lifted him to a higher perspective where fear shrinks and faith expands. When you embrace this truth, your heart becomes less reactive and more rooted. The worries that once claimed your attention start losing their urgency, and the presence of God becomes the anchor that keeps you steady even when circumstances shift without warning. This is why beginning your day with Psalm 27 can transform not just your morning, but your entire emotional rhythm. It teaches your heart where to rest and where to rise. If you have ever felt God becoming your refuge in a moment when everything else felt unstable, share your experience in the comments. Your words may be the reminder someone else needs to realize that they too have a safe place waiting for them beneath the covering of His presence. One of the most striking moments in Psalm 27 is David's declaration that there is one thing he desires above all else, to dwell in the house of the Lord and to gaze upon His beauty. This is not the language of routine religion. It is the language of someone who has discovered that true strength is born from intimacy, not activity. When you begin your day with this mindset, everything within you shifts. Instead of rushing into the morning carrying the weight of your own expectations, you step into it with a heart anchored in presence. Because seeking God is not about obligation, it is about realignment. It steadies your emotions, softens your thoughts, and invites your spirit to breathe before the world demands your attention. People often wake up searching for clarity or motivation, but David reveals a deeper truth. What the soul actually longs for is nearness, closeness to the one who understands the heart, even when the heart does not understand itself. And when you make space for that nearness at the beginning of your day, your perspective begins to clear. The internal noise quiets. The burdens that felt heavy start to move into the background. To seek God is to shift your center. It is to say, before anything else speaks to me today, let your voice be the one that shapes my spirit. The beauty David speaks of is not physical sight, it is spiritual perception. It is the ability to see God's character in the middle of everyday life, to sense His guidance even in ordinary decisions, to recognize His hand in moments that might seem insignificant to others. And this kind of awareness does not come from rushing, it comes from stillness, from letting the morning become a meeting place where your heart encounters God's peace before confronting anything else. When David prayed this, he was not escaping responsibility. He was preparing for it. He knew that strength is not built by striving, but by abiding. And when this begins to shape your own mornings, something profound happens. Your emotions become less reactive. Your thoughts become gentler. Your choices become more intentional. You start living from a deeper center, one that is not easily shaken by what unfolds around you. Because the one who begins the day seeking God does not walk through the hours ahead trying to manufacture peace. They carry it, and that quiet strength formed in the early moments of the morning becomes the foundation for everything that follows, as Psalm 27 continues to unfold its wisdom in layers that prepare your heart for even greater understanding. There is a mysterious line in Psalm 27 that reveals a side of God we often overlook. He hides you, not abandons you, not ignores you, but hides you. And this hiding is not punishment. It is protection. It is the quiet, tender work of a God who sees dangers you cannot see, who understands attacks that have not yet reached you, who knows when your spirit needs shelter instead of exposure. When David says that God will conceal him in his pavilion and set him high upon a rock, he is describing seasons when God removes you from certain places, certain people, certain opportunities, not because you are unworthy, but because he is shielding your development. Sometimes the most spiritual thing God does for you is pull you away from what you thought you were ready for. Many people feel discouraged when life seems to slow down or when doors that looked promising suddenly close. But Psalm 27 reframes these moments. It teaches you that divine protection often looks like divine delay. God will hide you when the weight of the next season would crush you prematurely. He will shelter you when your emotions are too fragile or your discernment too thin to navigate what lies ahead. And this hiding can feel confusing because it does not announce itself. It often feels like stillness, silence, or even isolation. Yet beneath the surface, something sacred is happening. God is reshaping your strength from the inside out. There are seasons when God keeps your name unseen, your voice unheard, your plans paused because he is building something within you that cannot be formed in the open. Growth in public is easily celebrated, but growth in hiding is where the deepest transformation takes place. The roots of a tree do not grow in sunlight. They grow underground, in the unseen, in the quiet. And likewise, God establishes your spiritual roots in hidden seasons so that when storms rise, you remain steady. David understood that being hidden was not a setback. It was a preparation for elevation. Being set high on a rock comes after being concealed in the shelter of God's presence. When you carry this perspective into your morning, your heart begins to respond differently to the slow places in life. What once felt like stagnation begins to feel like strategy. What once felt like silence begins to feel like shaping. And the hiding becomes less frightening because you realize it is the hand of a protective Father positioning you for something you cannot yet see. This is the quiet strength of Psalm 27, teaching you that even when God seems still, he is actively guarding, guiding, and preparing your spirit for what comes next, unfolding truths that continue deepening as the psalm moves into its next revelation. There is a moment in Psalm 27 when David shifts from confidence to vulnerability, and it is here that the psalm becomes intensely human. After declaring that God is his light, his salvation, and his refuge, David cries out, "Hear my voice when I call, Lord." This is not a polished prayer. It is the voice of a soul that knows strength and fragility can exist in the same breath. And beginning your day with this awareness allows you to approach God without pretending to be stronger than you feel. It teaches you that spiritual maturity is not the absence of weakness, but the willingness to bring that weakness into the presence of God. In the quiet hours of the morning, when the heart is still tender and thoughts have not yet been shaped by the pressures of the day, this cry becomes even more honest. There are moments when your spirit feels stretched, when unanswered questions linger, when your emotions do not align with the faith you profess. Yet David shows that God does not turn away from trembling voices. He draws near to them. When David says, "Have mercy on me and answer me," he is revealing a truth many overlook. Even the strongest believers have moments when they feel hidden, unheard, or uncertain. But these moments are not signs of spiritual failure. They are invitations into deeper dependence. The sincerity of David's cry teaches you that God values honesty far more than composure. He is not moved by perfect words, but by authentic hearts. And when you allow yourself to begin the day acknowledging your need for Him, something inside you grows softer, clearer, more receptive. Mercy becomes more than a theological concept. It becomes a lifeline. You begin to understand that God's presence is not earned through confidence, but accessed through surrender. And surrender is often strongest in the moments when your voice trembles, when your prayers feel unfinished, when all you can offer is your longing for Him to hear you. This cry for mercy also reveals that vulnerability is not weakness, but worship. It is the release of emotional weight that was never meant to be carried alone. It is the moment you stop performing strength and start receiving it. And when you approach the day from this posture, your spirit becomes more grounded, your reactions become gentler, your inner world becomes more aligned with the truth that God listens, not distantly, not reluctantly, but intimately. David understood this, and as the psalm continues, his vulnerability becomes the doorway to renewed confidence. It prepares the heart for the deeper revelations that follow, shaping the next steps with humility and trust. If you have ever felt God meet you in a moment of honest vulnerability, share your experience in the comments. Your story may help someone else realize that their own trembling prayer is not a sign of distance from God, but evidence that they are being drawn closer. There is a turning point in Psalm 27 where David confronts one of the most difficult tensions of the spiritual life, the moment when the heart wants to give up. After crying out for mercy, he reflects on the temptation to lose confidence, to let discouragement shape his perspective, to allow the weight of waiting to feel heavier than the promise he is holding on to. It is here that his declaration becomes both instruction and lifeline. Wait on the Lord. This is not passive waiting, it is a disciplined posture of the soul, a deliberate choice to anchor your emotions in what God has said, rather than in what you currently see. When you start your day with this truth, your internal landscape begins to shift. You recognize that strength is not always found in movement. Sometimes it is found in stillness. Waiting is one of the most misunderstood parts of the spiritual journey. Many assume that if God has not acted yet, He will not act. Others interpret delay as denial or silence as absence. But Psalm 27 reveals something different. Waiting is not evidence that God is distant. It is evidence that God is preparing something deeper than your timeline can contain. It is the slow, steady work of formation, shaping patience, trust, and spiritual resilience. And when you allow this understanding to sink into your morning, the pressure to control outcomes begins to fade. You stop treating time as an enemy and begin seeing it as a tool God uses to strengthen your spirit from within. David's words remind you that discouragement does not disqualify you. Feeling tired does not make you weak. Even the most devoted believers face seasons where hope feels thin and perseverance feels costly. Yet it is in these very moments that waiting becomes sacred. It teaches you to separate your emotions from your identity, your circumstances from your calling, your present discomfort from God's unfolding plan. Waiting builds a quiet strength that does not depend on immediate results. It teaches you to breathe deeply, to trust gently, and to walk through the day with a heart that remains open even when heaven feels silent. And as this truth becomes part of your morning rhythm, you begin to notice a subtle transformation. Discouragement loses some of its weight. Doubt becomes less convincing. Your spirit grows steadier, not because everything is resolved, but because you are no longer tying your peace to outcomes. You are grounding it in God's character. This posture prepares you for the next revelation hidden within Psalm 27, the moment where strength rises, not from what you feel, but from the foundation God has been quietly building through every season of waiting. As Psalm 27 continues to unfold, David reveals the internal struggle that many experience, but few are willing to admit. The weariness of a heart that has been fighting for too long. He speaks of confidence not as something automatic, but as something chosen, nurtured, and strengthened through continual encounters with God. I would have lost heart, he admits, unless I had believed to see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. This is one of the most honest declarations in the entire psalm. It shows that even the strongest faith traditions are built on moments of near collapse. Yet something inside David held on, not because circumstances made it easy, but because he refused to surrender the expectation of God's goodness. When you begin your day with this perspective, the fragile parts of your heart find room to breathe. There is relief in acknowledging that hope is not always effortless. Sometimes hope feels like a choice made in the middle of exhaustion. Sometimes it feels like whispering a promise back to yourself when discouragement tries to settle in your chest. But David's words remind you that spiritual strength is not the absence of strain. It is the ability to look beyond it. It is the awareness that God's goodness is not confined to some distant future. It is available in the living world, in today's struggles, in the quiet corners of your morning where He meets you before anything else competes for your attention. This belief does not deny pain, it reframes it. It teaches you that a weary heart is not a sign of spiritual failure, but a sign of spiritual investment. You grow tired because you have been holding on. You feel stretched because you have been walking forward when it would have been easier to turn back. And in this tension, Psalm 27 becomes more than a declaration. It becomes a lifeline. It steadies you, reminding you that even when you do not see immediate change, your perseverance is not wasted. God is working in layers that extend beyond what your emotions can measure. As this truth settles into your morning, your heart begins to regain a gentler rhythm. You breathe a little deeper. You think a little clearer. You find yourself standing a little taller, not because the pressures have vanished, but because your spirit has remembered something vital. The goodness of the Lord is not a distant hope. It is a present reality unfolding in ways you may not yet recognize, and this belief becomes the quiet force that carries you forward, preparing your spirit for the final revelation of Psalm 27, where strength rises with new clarity and hope transforms the way you step into the rest of the day. As Psalm 27 reaches its final movement, David speaks with a clarity that feels both gentle and commanding, as if strength itself is being whispered into the heart. Wait on the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. This is not the encouragement of someone who has never tasted fear. It is the wisdom of someone who has wrestled with uncertainty, confronted seasons of silence, and discovered that strength is not something God demands from you, but something He builds within you. When you begin your day with this truth, a quiet transformation begins to unfold. Your spirit becomes less reactive to stress, less shaken by unexpected pressure, less defined by the weight of what you cannot control. You start to sense that courage is not a moment, it is a rhythm shaped by trust. David's final words reveal that courage is not born from perfect circumstances. It grows from a heart that continues to lean into God even when the path feels unclear. Strength does not always feel like confidence. Sometimes it feels like taking one more step when your emotions tell you to stop. Sometimes it feels like choosing faith when fear seems louder. But Psalm 27 teaches you that God does not ask you to manufacture this strength alone. He breathes it into you. He nurtures it in the unseen places. He shapes it through every morning when you choose to anchor your heart in His promises rather than your anxieties. And as this awareness settles into the beginning of your day, something inside you shifts. You no longer approach the morning as someone bracing for impact, but as someone being guided. You carry a stillness that does not depend on silence and a confidence that does not depend on certainty. You start to feel a deeper steadiness, one that reminds you your steps are not random, your growth is not accidental, and your journey is not unsupported. The Lord strengthens your heart each time you turn to Him, each time you choose trust over panic, each time you let His presence redefine the atmosphere around you. If you reach this point, let this moment mark something meaningful in your spirit. And if this message spoke to you, consider leaving a comment saying something like, "This message was for me, so I know you walked through this journey with me until the end." While you are here, take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you want more messages that strengthen your heart the way this one did. And if you feel connected to everything we explored, there is another video right here that continues this same spiritual direction. It might be exactly what your spirit needs next, so go ahead and follow through as your heart stays open to what God is unfolding in your life.